got a presenter who's coming to us with a lot of good background. And not only has he got the experience of being in the political realm and understands party politics, but came out of an Ivy League school with a big degree. Went into his hometown, fixed a city that was about ready to go bankrupt. I think I saw crossing guards at like $129 an hour or something like that. I've got my application on file right now. But what has intrigued me about Steve is not only is he a great presenter with some great ideas, he actually has kind of fought the Republican Party a little bit. You would not consider Steve to be the John McCain Republican. He is more in the lines of maybe what somebody would consider Ted Cruz to be in terms of being a Republican. Independent thinker, thinks for himself, and wants to do the right thing. So tonight we've asked him to come and talk to us about budgeting and finance and anything else he'd like to share that puts those things into perspective so we have a better understanding. So I believe that one of the big things we need to be able to talk about with folks who don't understand is how this money deal is crippling us, not only for now, and it's already starting to drag, but how the future could really be different than we think it's going to be, just simply because we don't watch the way we spend our money. So please welcome Steve Laffey. T-shirt, cut-off shorts, and most of the people there were, button-down shirts. They'd worked at IBM. 23 people of my 90 section mates were CPAs. The other guys were at Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. So for a guy to be standing in front of you, I made it my love of finance and numbers, and I was good at numbers and so forth. And I spent 15 years in the financial field where I was the president, the chief operating officer at the end, ran the venture capital operations, the trading desk and so forth, of about a $500 million revenue firm called Morgan Keegan. It was sort of the Merrill Lynch of the Southeast. And we sold it, and I had a calling at a Christian camp. It's a long story, but I decided I was going to go back to where I was never going to go back, to Cranston, Rhode Island. And Cranston, Rhode Island was America today, back in 2002 in a microcosm. Second largest city, the size of Fort Collins, really, without the students. But imagine a city that a 9-0 Democratic city council in a heavily Democratic state, a Democratic mayor, had decided that in order to balance the budget, they would take all the money out of the city pension plan. That was their idea. That's what they did. They passed the budget where they said at the very end they'd overspent by $22 million over a couple of years. Never told anybody. Didn't do any audits. Didn't do any audits. Just didn't. By the way, it's illegal. They just didn't do it. But in Rhode Island, it was okay, I guess. And so I showed up, and I decided I would give back to a town and a city that really helped me. And I ran from there, and by the grace of God, I won and spent 4 years fixing the city. But yes, the ultimate story is the crossing guards. I ran the whole race. I looked at all the numbers. That's what I do. I go through. I can jot down. Oh, that's something's out of line there. Oh, let's take a look at it. I never noticed, didn't pick up on the fact that there were 39 female crossing guards who were making $129 an hour. In fact, crossing guards in Cranston never retired. They died. Made 100. They worked a half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the afternoon, 1 hour a day, $45 a day in cash, free health insurance for the entire family, that's 12 grand right there, a pension plan, sick days, 17 paid holidays. By the way, there aren't 17 holidays. No one can name 17. Rhode Island Independence Day, stuff like that. Right? In Rhode Island, and this is why with the Reagan Club I can say this, Reagan had the air traffic controllers. In Rhode Island, I had the Cranston Crossing guys. And I fired after they would not do anything to rectify a bankrupt city, a city about to default in its debt, a city borrowing 3-month money at interest rates of 15%. So how bad would your finances have to be to go into a bank today, even today, and say, it's 15%, Mr. Martin? No, you wouldn't happen, right? So that's what was going on in Cranston. I spent, by the way, we had a major lawsuit with the International Laborers Union, a very corrupt union, who, by the way, headquartered in Providence, Rhode Island, and all the executives lived in Cranston, Rhode Island. And we fought for years and years, and we won. We got away with firing them. I videotaped them, not crossing kids. I'm the kind of guy that if you let me run things, I get to the nut of the problem. That's why I want to get today. The nut of the problem in Cranston was fixed, and 4 years later, the bond rating was up 8 notches, and the city was back home, there was $20 million in the bank, and I wasn't the mayor anymore. My one place, I guess, in U.S. history so far, hopefully it's not like how I keel over unless it's tonight, is I am the only, according to Craig Shirley, who wrote Reagan's biographies, the only elected Republican to be attacked, running for higher office, attacked by the National Republican Party since Abe Lincoln. No one is, people, they do it to that guy McDaniel in Mississippi. They get Democrats to vote twice, they defeat him. The poor guy Joe Miller in Alaska, they did what they did to him 4 years ago. He actually wins a primary. They go with the independent Murkowski, and Joe Miller loses, but they've never attacked anybody who was a sitting elected Republican, except for me. And I wrote a book about it. I wrote one copy. Whoever wants it, you guys can pass it around. But the story of the Republican Party losing power in 06 is in a grassroots story. I got a book deal through Penguin Books, and it's in here. So I'll leave a copy with you. And so I came out here because Rhode Island really was no hope. And by the way, this is a real problem to talk about, not all tonight. But there are places like Detroit, Memphis, Tennessee, and now in Rhode Island that really aren't coming back. Part of America is not coming back. And if you want to see it physically, people live in Colorado. I don't think people really understand. Unless you drive the country and you stop in places in Oklahoma, even Oklahoma, in Youngstown, Ohio, and you travel through the hard rock of this country, and you see what's happened to our manufacturing concern, and the job, and how people live, and the crime, and you talk about it. And I brought you this. I have many copies of this. But if you haven't seen it, Fixing America is something I made in 2011, 12. And it's played worldwide on the Christian Television Network, and I've been around speaking about it. Colorado Christian University here, it's played here. But take a copy. In it, and we're going to talk about it right now, the budget. In it is me balancing the U.S. budget in 8 minutes. And my pet peeve in politics, I should say this for the conclusion, is that our politicians, forget the Democrats, but the Republicans are not willing to tell you how deep this problem is and how we're going to solve it. Specifically because, well, this audience did. A bunch of people probably are near or on Social Security, so no one wants to hear about that. We wouldn't want, because you all vote. Medicare. People want to hear about Medicare, Medicaid, what has to happen to that. But we are on a trajectory, and the reason I put this slide up here is that this is this year's deficit, $560 billion in fiscal 15, right? Here's the 18 trillion dollars. But the biggest problem is the $211 trillion that we have promised future people that we can't possibly pay. And nobody deals with that. No one deals with any of this, by the way. My way of looking at things, and this is how I want to talk about the budget. What's the biggest line item in our budget? This year we're going to spend $3.9 trillion, and we're going to take in I'm going to be rough with the numbers now. $3.3 trillion. We're going to run roughly a 560, let's call it around a $600 billion deficit in a year where supposedly unemployment is 6.1%, and we're creating jobs at $250,000 a month, which is, by the way, a terrible number historically, but we're creating jobs at $250,000 a month. Really? And I'm not in that age group yet, but we're the greatest generation? The people who are 70 years old? People people should be getting out of college tonight. They should go find their parents and grandparents and say, what the hell are you doing to us? Because by my estimation, we've got like 5 to 7 years left before this thing blows up, at most. You know, when World War I started, people say, oh, well, Archduke Ferdinand got shot, right, like 100 years ago, roughly speaking. So the war started, but that really wasn't how it started. There were all these underlying underpinnings between Germany and England. We could talk about it for hours. But there were all these, so I don't know what the pinprick is. But when we go through line items of numbers, and we say, okay, what's in the budget? Well, it's $1 trillion now every year for healthcare in the budget. Let's call it Medicare, Medicaid. It's $1 trillion. You add them together. Anybody deal with that? I mean, in business, we would take the biggest number, right, and say, let's go deal with the biggest number we have and solve that problem. We're trying to solve it by Obamacare? Ensuring more people for less money? That was the theory. Really? Ensure more people for less money? I mean, if someone came down from Mars and understood the English language and watched what was going on, from literally stuff like that to the Washington Redskins were in the news? That's in the news? Like, that's a news story? To, you mean after you heard about Ebola, you didn't embargo people in another country before they came here? You didn't do that? First thing, you didn't do that. People here, some people might be here old enough to remember tuberculosis places, where they just came and grabbed you and said, hey, you're going over here. We didn't do that. And now we're searching around. And by the way, if you watch the news today, the scariest thing, I told this to Michael, the scariest thing that I saw on TV today as I'm working up before I get ready to come, was that in Dallas, Texas, there are 5 schools where they grabbed 5 kids who came in contact with this guy who came to visit some lady who had a child with him and a child with like other people, right? And they can't really communicate that well with all these people because in those 5 schools in Dallas, Texas, they speak 38 languages. That's a country? Like, this is our country? This is where we've come to? People used to come to this country, right? They were never eligible for welfare. They came on Ellis Island, and someone said, I vouch for Vinny. I vouch for Stephen Laffey's great-great-grandfather. He will be with me. If he gets in trouble, you come find me. They walked off the boat, and they never looked back. We still call it immigration. We don't have immigration. People have cell phones. I mean, I've been to Guatemala. I've been into Mexico on these trips. There's no immigration. People are calling, sending money back, blah, blah, blah. They used to come and just come. You never went back. You didn't, watch the movie The Godfather. People didn't go back, right, for like 150 years, right? So, look at all the problems we have. No matter what you think the biggest problem is, one of them is our budget deficit, our deficits. And our deficits run like this. We really have 2 major deficits. We have a budget deficit, and we've got a trade deficit. The trade deficit is really oil that we get from countries that absolutely hate us and are trying to take us down, and communist China, which today in the Wall Street Journal they made it official. Communist China is going to join up with Russia, right? No, and by the way, they're already joined up with Venezuela. By the way, we don't have a foreign policy for this. We don't even talk about it like this. Syria, right? Iran, they're all together because by themselves they can't take down America. All together they figure they can. But until we get our budget in order, we can't solve these other problems. A lot of the other problems, by the way, that we have in this country, illegal immigration, it's a giant budget problem. Much of it falls on local communities. Washington, D.C., and one of our school district up in Reston, my buddy from first grade, so there's 1,250 new kids. Out of nowhere, literally in a suburb of Washington, D.C. at 12,000, by the way, 12,000, I homeschooled my kids for about $800 each a year. At $12,000 a year. It's blowing up our budgets. So how do we, if I want to go through more, $961 billion we're going to spend on Social Security this year. $650 billion on defense. 616. 650 we'll call it. $154 billion on veterans. So think about this, and by the way, no one wants to tick off any veterans, and I love our veterans, and and so we've got to change the Veterans Administration. I'll tell you that in a second, as far as solving this budget deficit. But if it's $650 billion, including salaries, but it's 154 for the retirees, or what we call veterans, does that add up to a fighting? Is that the ratio analysis you would have in a business to have a full-scale national defense to defend this country to the best of its ability? No! We're going to be swamped by the Veterans Administration costs, and less money will go into the things that we actually are going to need. Things that Reagan talked about that we still don't have. We have different systems, but we still don't have Star Wars. He talked about it in 84, 83, 85. We could have it today. He wanted to give it to everybody, his own Iron Dome. We don't have it. We have 3 tiers of, not to go into where these are in Alaska and so forth, to defend our country, and they're fairly good. But we don't have it because we didn't focus on what the biggest problem is. And we allow, by the way, think about the Senate race today in Colorado. And we all know who we hope who wins. But just think about it. Is there a discussion like this in any debate? I would love to see a presidential debate with 10 people in it, where all of a sudden there's just 10 blackboards, a piece of chalk, and they say, go balance the United States budget. Here's the numbers, here's the deficit. Go to the blackboard. People would have a heart attack. People, Republican, Democrats wouldn't even know because they'd be drooling, right? They just wouldn't do it. But I'm talking about Republican debate. People would fall off the back of their chairs. But somehow we accept this. We accept this as a normal state of being, that today's Senate race in this state is simply about one thing: birth control. By kind of on both sides. Because everybody's going to try to play to those, I guess, 15,000 people in the middle. Meanwhile, the country is burning. Let me give you an example. So we've got $1 trillion that we're doing nothing about. And what's our biggest problem in health care for this country? Obesity. The biggest problem in health care is obesity. Anybody, do we have a solution for that?
More cheesecake.
Think about the way things are done. Think about the way our health insurance, think about visiting the last time you saw a doctor. Think about people who chronically are 500-pound people, but it's not to criticize, but who are not told, listen, we got to get you down to 400 pounds next year. Well, we can't give you that bypass operation. We got to get you down to 300 pounds after that, and we got to get you down, because this is the biggest expense that we have. Not a word in this country. You won't find an article. At SteveLaffey.com, which is a radio TV network that I built, you can go find an hour-long show on it, watched by several thousand people. But I'm talking about as a matter of national importance. We don't say no word about it. Social Security. Has anybody seen anybody in the last 5 years have one solution? The last time someone opened their mouth about it, I think it was George Bush. And I think it was 2006, 5, was it 5? I was at a high school picking up my son, and they asked me, what do you think about it? And I said, well, first of all, how are you going to fund it? And of course, he gave up in 2 or 3 weeks. But for example, just to talk about Social Security, let me give you a solution. I'm a solution-based guy. So we have, if you were to go to the CBO budget numbers, you would find, I haven't looked at it this year, but I'm guessing you would find it used to be 20, it'd be about 30% underfunded. So that simply means that given what we promised people, we either have to raise taxes 30% or cut benefits 30%. That's one way to do it, right? On a $961 billion budget line item. But however, what if we just said this? Because it's not just today's deficit in Social Security, which by the way, 83, Greenspan said he was going to fix, right? So it was fixed. 83, it's fixed. It's never fixed. These people never fix anything. So what if we simply said, here's what we're going to do. Whatever you have, I don't know what you are, but I'm 52. So at 52, whatever that letter that you don't get the letter anymore, right? Do you notice you don't get the letter? Because they don't have enough money to send you the letter. Every year you used to get a letter. It would say if you started taking Social Security at 62 or 65 or 67, you get this at this rate and so forth. Well, just pretend you get the letter again. And it just simply said, listen, Steve Laffey, 52, you're going to get $3,000 if you retire at 65 and $4,000 at 67. And you're going to get that. And we're putting a zero now out there forever. And at 52, for the next 8 years, or until you're 60, 8% of your, in a different account, it's going to be your account. So if you keel over in this account before you're 60, your heirs get the money. And at 60, now remember, there's a guy 20 who's starting right now, and he's at 20, he's going to be putting, let's say 8% of his pay into the system, right? But it's his until he's 60. And at 60, we're going to buy annuities. 10% every year until you're 70. And by the way, we could change the numbers, this is just rough numbers. Until you're 70. And along the way, you lose the right when you keel over, because now you're in a pool of 60-year-olds, and 61-year-olds, and 62-year-olds, right? So that money's going to last you until the last guy dies, whatever that money is. So now I'm going to get two different checks at 70. One will be what I've earned, this is 52. One will be 8 years' worth that gets bought into annuities. And we're going to invest the money in a worldwide stock basket of stocks and bonds with one computer, no need for Merrill Lynch, if it still exists, brokers, no need for anybody taking cuts out of it, but it's your money. Now we've solved like a 30-some-odd trillion dollar problem. Because when you do the actuarial numbers looking out into infinity and discounting back to today, you have assets that match liabilities. Very simple for people to understand. Okay, so now we got 30-some-odd trillion. We could do this all night long. We could actually solve these problems. But I want to bring up to you one thing that I think is just one of the biggest problems. It's our news cycle. And our news cycle works like this. It's like hula hoops. You know, hula hoops come back every so often like yo-yos, right? So just think about this. People, think about this. In February, for example, I'll give you two topics. February of this year, a report came out from the United Nations, which doesn't do very much good. But a report came out led by an Australian jurist about North Korea. Do you remember this? That North Korea was torturing and killing so many people that the leader had to be brought up in front of the Hague, and everybody went crazy. The interviews with people who escaped North Korea, and by the way, tonight, when you go home and say your prayers, just realize that North Korea, controlled by Communist China, that we give a 40% discount to in everything we do, they allow North Korea to make mothers kill their babies by drowning them tonight. That if you're in the wrong family or get caught with the Bible, they kill everybody. Everybody goes into a death camp. Hundreds of thousands of people dying in North Korea. Well, that was the news cycle. Everybody went crazy. Go back and look at February this year. By March, no one's talked about it again. The cycle just goes and goes to another story. We never stop and say, let's solve this problem. All right, we got a big problem. Let's solve this problem. Wouldn't it be great if we elected a president who said, oh, by the way, in the first month, we're going to fix Social Security. Everybody stop. We're going to fix Social Security. No one's really going to like it, but I need to save $30 trillion because I've got kids, and you've got kids, and they can't possibly pay this back. Next story, this is during the campaign, was the Veterans Administration. You must remember this one, right? The Veterans Administration, they finally figured out there was something wrong. I remember like 6 years ago they figured something was wrong. And like 12 years ago. And like 20 years ago. There was something wrong with Veterans Administration. $154 billion. And we find that our veterans, who should be first in line, are last in line at a really bad candy shop. We find that it takes 6 months to hire a nurse because of all the paperwork, so really good nurses, which there's a shortage of in America, they're not going, right? They're not going to work with the Veterans Administration. Finally, some congressmen said, I've actually, some of these buildings don't look that nice. They didn't go to visit. People on the committees in Congress and the Senate didn't visit Veterans Administration hospitals and see the disaster. No one listened to the whistleblowers, and they were going to do something about it. They threw $19 billion at it. It isn't going to be anywhere near enough. We all know, well, I know what the solution should be, and they simply won't do it. Why? Power. Power in a public that is placid and not willing to stand up and say, no, enough, solve this problem. You know, in economics, there are very few things that are both cheaper and better, right? Like a fig Newton is more expensive than a fig bar, but it really tastes better, right? So you spend more, so sometimes you buy the fig bars if you have no money. So, you know, Pop-Tarts taste better than toaster pastries, generally speaking, right? But in the Veterans Administration, if we simply said, everybody gets, everybody gets my Blue Cross Anthem, I'm self-employed, $10,000 deductible. Here, you served our country in a theater of war. You get that plan. Here you go. Go to the children's hospital with your kids. Go to National Jewish because you have a breathing problem. We're not sticking you in some place in outskirts where there's some secondary doctor. We're not doing that. Cheaper, better, and nobody will do it. No Republican, no Democrat, nobody will do it. Because they like having control over Veterans Administration. They like coming back to the district and saying, I'm going to solve this problem. Even though many of them serve on committees. I mean, where I come from, you just get fired. Someone comes in and says, listen, I've been working on this for like 6 years. I've been on the committee, and I just kind of figured, what? Don't even want to get out. No one would say that. You just get out. So there's another problem to solve, a $154 billion problem. Education's $130 billion. How about we just zero it out? I mean, people always say to me something, they say, Steve, my friends, what is a conservative? Because sometimes people say, I'm referred to as a populist, as a conservative. I don't know about these brands. I say, listen, I'm really into things that work really well over a long period of time. Man marrying a woman, having children, that seems to have worked for a long period of time, right? I'm into it. I got 6 kids. That's what I do. I mean, a little facetious, but what's worked? What's conservative? You know? And so we have to look at things, what has worked over a long period of time. This is not working. What we're doing in this country, and by the way, here's the thing, everybody knows it. What's not working is a news cycle that continues to find, by the way, Russia's out of the news, it's ready to come back in if they do something else, and so forth. Is it maddening? We as Republicans or conservatives, we need to make our elected officials stop and solve one problem. In fact, I just jotted this down before I came in. I'll talk about the budget deficit in a second, but just stop and think. You don't have to raise your hand, but what's the biggest problem in the world? You know, other than people don't know, in my opinion, don't know who Jesus is. But what's the real biggest problem in a secular number, right? Is it Social Security? Is it Communist China? Is it lack of a foreign policy? Is it really bad parents? Is it our schools, right? Is it climate change? Obviously not. Is it rising inequality? Is it the Federal Reserve? That's one of the big problems. Is it Russia? Is it national debt? Is it the trade deficit? Is it the lack of a rule of law? Is it Obamacare? Is it obesity? Is it, I don't know, but which one? I'm getting really tired. Because I've been doing this for a while. I've done this for like 13, 14 years. To like try to find a way to get across to the American people in my community, that this is going to change. Where's the victory? Name the victory. We don't have a victory. We need a victory. We, the people who believe in freedom, need a victory. And so we've got to figure out how to get to a victory. I think it's about everybody in this room stopping and figuring out that we're going to choose one problem, and we're going to have to go to Washington, and we're going to have to not leave until we get what we want. Whether it's fixing Social Security, having a serious foreign policy, we can go on all day about what it is. But we've got to have a victory, because people, like, I'll tell you one of my great worries. It's people I went to school with, who many of them, captains of industry, they're still running companies and so forth. Many of them, I was with 5 of them in Seattle. Many of them are checking out. Many of my friends are like, can't be done. Laffey, you just keep doing it. I'll send you checks. I'll do whatever you're going to do. I live vicariously through you. But I don't know if it can be solved anymore. And that state of hopelessness is starting to take over America. At all income levels, that it can't be solved. I saw it again. My life is the microcosm of America. It was Cranston, Rhode Island, 2002. Everybody knew the place was going broke. Everybody knew Cranston going broke would bring down the whole state of Rhode Island. Everybody knew it, and they didn't know what to do. Because a lot of people have 2 jobs, they got kids they got to get to football practice, they got this, they got that, right? But they were sort of hopeless. And if I offered anything, it was like, let's rally, let's go, let's get it done, and we did. We had a city council meeting with 1,500 people show up. Picture a scene like that. You know? for fighting teachers' unions and winning, by the way, winning them. So, you know, I could go on all day about the budget deficit and so forth, but, you know, each one of these things is a specific problem. I mean, for example, health insurance. Wouldn't it be better? We all know, we've heard this before, and, you know, you have to turn on Sean Hannity again to hear him stuff to show with it, but wouldn't it be, common sense would say, how many people have you met on an airplane or known, or yourself? Like when I moved out here, I didn't tell anybody in Rhode Island I moved here until I got health insurance. I have 6 children. I have one with a particular problem. By the grace of God, solved by the Children's Hospital, we think, here in Denver. By the grace of God, it's the only, if I ever came here for one reason, that's it. I'm happy as a clam. I really am. I can't say enough about it. But I wouldn't want people to think I moved here if I couldn't get insurance. So, you know, one of the great things about America is our mobility. I mean, people do move. Now, you think people don't and so forth, but people do. You go to Glasgow, Scotland, nobody moved. Now, by the way, that was the only place that voted decisively to be part of, to get Scotland away from the United Kingdom. I've been to Glasgow 50 times. Nobody moves. Nobody leaves. They're not going to take a job. They're just going to stay right there. They don't care if their job is taken. They're not leaving. But in America, we move. They go to the oil rigs up in North Dakota. So if we let people buy health insurance across state lines, it's some common sense. We can't get it done. Like, why not? I met a lady, bring you to tears, I met a lady in North Carolina. I was on a plane out that way, Kenton to Washington. She wanted to come she had a great job offer. But they couldn't come because they had a specific problem with a daughter that they couldn't take their health insurance to. They were afraid they wouldn't. It was a smaller company, but they just couldn't do it. It was a very expensive problem. Bad for America. Higher cost because we're not being able to move. So there's things like that we can do. How about if we told the insurance company, if we were going to have regulation, and listen, I could sit here and tell you we should not have any, we're going back to the 1870s, and I'm just going to be wearing a 6-pack, but let's talk about what we really can do. We can really get insurance companies to be responsible for every individual to lower the health insurance cost. I mean, guy shows up, you know, he's 400 pounds, and he's an $80,000 problem. Actuarially, he's an $80,000 problem. Laffey shows up, I haven't gained or lost a pound in 50 years, in 30 years. I'm probably a $5,000 problem. So they say, so someone takes me, they take the 80,000 guy, and the job is, and how you get paid and reimbursed, you should make the $80,000 problem a $70,000 problem, and a $60,000 problem. And we have to tell people that if you're not willing to do this after a long period of time, we can't give you the triple bypass. Harsh medicine. But if we did it, it's just like being a parent. My kids know, if I say, listen, let me just be straight with you. If you do that, here's what's going to happen. They all know. That's exactly, no more, no less. This is what's going to happen to you. They change their behavior. So we can take, you know, by the way, if we told America, listen, we're going to cap any government expenditure at 10% of GDP, right? Or whatever it is today. People are like, wow, kind of, we're all getting skin in the game. If GDP grows at 4%, we're going to all get a little more. If we go into recession, we're going to get a little less. Someone might tell their neighbor, hey, Jimmy, you know the diabetes medicine that you haven't been taking for 3 months? Well, take it. The heart medicine that they recommended for you, or the fact that they told you to go see that physical, go do it. I'm in the game. See, in America, I think one of the biggest problems, non-financial problems, we don't feel like we're all in the same game. Everybody's doing their own thing. But part of America is that we've got to be in the same game. You know, if we're not the world superpower, and we won't be the world superpower because of finances, it won't because of our natural resources, we got the most. It won't because of our ingenuity, we got the smartest people. We attract the smartest people. It'll be about finances. And I think people know this. Yet we're wandering around wondering, what the heck are we going to do? And I think people are getting tired that they haven't had a victory. You take, for example, I just give you the trade deficit, for example. You know, if I walked into your house, slapped your wife, turned over the kitchen table, and broke a couple windows and marched out, would you give me a 40% discount on everything that I want to sell? We do that with Communist China. Oppressing their own people. People disappearing. Christians disappearing. Christians everywhere disappearing outside of America, it looks like. And we give them a 40% discount, basically, on every good We allow them to keep their currency cheap. People say, oh, they're not going to buy US dollars. Listen, it's a $380 billion a year problem. Think of how many jobs would be created in America. And I'm a big free trader if you've got a free country. I'm a big free trader if you've got bananas and I get Intel chips. And by economic theory, you're supposed to be making more bananas and I'm going to sell you some more chips. But I'm not really big on people stealing my technology and my patents and oppressing the people and then taking, I mean, think about what they do. It's genius for them in some respects. They have to buy our treasuries to keep their currency cheaper by about at least 20% than it should be. We then afford them protective tariffs that work about 23% in their favor. To such an extent that when the Golden Gate Bridge was repaired, we don't have a fabrication unit big enough to rebuild the bridge. Now, if several of the bridges were bombed, would anybody think that's a good idea? Of course not. We all know this. Here's the problem. We all know this, and we keep doing it. So, like, we're like the drunk, and they own the liquor store. They have to keep buying treasuries. They can't stop. Because what's going to happen? There'll be revolts, like in Hong Kong today, but they'll be in mainland China. They can't afford that. They want more control. But we've got to stop it. Before they take the extra cash. Their defense budget has gone from 80 billion to 100 billion. Some people think 160 billion. And I remember people say, oh, we're spending 600 billion. And we're spending it all around the world. But they're taking the extra cash and building machinery and tanks and missiles that they can't steal from us, and they try to steal from us, to the point where we're going to wake up. And they're going to launch an aircraft carrier that's going to be equal to ours. And all holy heck is going to break loose. Reagan talked about this, which is why this club should be the most popular club. Because people don't like Republicans, but they love Reagan. We're going to wake up in technical obsolescence in our nuclear facilities. In fact, for 25 years, we haven't even been able to test them. Russia breaks the INF Treaty, and we're like, oh, whatever, we'll keep abiding by it. Really? Think about what we're doing every day, and think about your children and your nieces, and how serious this is now. This is we are living through the most serious time since the revolution, and it was still just wandering around. And I'm just trying to get people to wake up. I write a book, I make a movie, I run, so forth. And really, it's like sometimes talking to, not this group, it's like talking to a stone. Because I think people feel hopeless. And our job, and my job, my call, I'm going to keep doing this probably until I keel over, is to find a way that we just all say, you know what, we've had enough. We need a victory. I don't know if we need another party or what we need to do, but we need a victory on something. So the people who believe in freedom, because it really is the people of the world versus corrupt governments. And ours is as corrupt as anything we've ever seen. I mean, think about it. Think about 5 different IRS workers, all their emails disappear at different times? Really? I mean, just stuff that, again, if you came from ours, you'd be like, lock them up. You wouldn't put up with it. Yet, what we do, we just go the next day. We go the next day. We've got to find a way to stop and win a battle. And I could talk to you about it all day long, but we, obviously, talking about finances, we are so out of whack that it's unheard of. John Maynard Keynes, the Keynesian guy, would not have said when the GDP is growing at 2 or 3%, which is, we should be growing more, we should run $500 billion deficit. It's not in the lexicon. I know, I've looked at it. It doesn't exist. He believed that at some point the market wouldn't clear when things were so bad and the government would have to step in. He was wrong. Markets do clear. It's not at the price he thought was the low price, right? And it hasn't worked. I mean, think about it. Only in government would you literally say, look at the Department of Education 77, 78, we'd work our way through, and then Bush would talk about vouchers running for president, and then for some unknown reason, decide that he would, negotiate with Ted Kennedy, right? Always a disaster. Ended up with No Child Left Behind. Then they would, by the way, test scores all the time are going down. People learning less as more federal government goes in. And then we would say, no, we're going to bribe the states, make sure that they do what we want them to do, do this race to the top that will get states to act like, I hate to say the word, but act like children, right? Grab for the candy, get themselves sucked in, and then Chris Christie and his buddies come up, and Jeb Bush come up with something called Common Core. And that's what's starting to come in now. And we know it's nonsense. We don't have to have the same curriculum in every state. We know that states do things differently. And they're the great laboratory. Some guys really screw up and they do something bad, but not everybody suffers because it's only California. We know that, but here we are doing it again. But this deficit is going to destroy our country. It does every single country that was a great superpower. And we've got to do something about it. We've got to rise up, and we've got to make sure our own people, whoever's running for Senate or Congress, whoever, can answer these basic questions. I'm not sure many of them can. They don't know what's in the budget. No one asked them. I did a debate here in Colorado. The questions were inane. They were stupid. 3 liberals asking 4 conservative questions. It was dumb. In fact, no one even watched it, but it was still dumb. PBS at 9:30 on Friday night. Great, thanks so much. We're going to get my message out that way. But anyway, I want to take your questions. And I talked for the time we talked about. So let me just close up here and just take any questions you might have. I think take away from this though that if you go away, we've got to stop this news cycle somehow and have a victory. And by the way, everybody's going a different direction. Every talk show host, everybody listen to radio shows. They get their own agendas. There's different groups doing different things. I would like, and I'm trying to find a way, that we find everybody and say, listen, I don't care if it's a fair tax. I haven't even talked about raising revenue. I don't care if it's a fair tax or a flat tax. Obviously, again, what is a conservative? Things that work over a long period of time. Has the IRS worked over a long period of time? No! But in the news cycle, you would think this is the only time it's been abused. It gets abused all the time. And we keep doing it. And we keep paying to it. Rather than a fair tax or a flat tax or a 999 or anything. Like randomly telling people to pay all their money one year would be, anything would be better than what we got going on. We got to stop.
Thanks for raising the concern on the budget. I think we all feel that concern for moments at a time. And then like you were saying, the news cycle and the distractions of living can kind of put it off. But it really is a crucial problem. Are any of the Republican presidential candidates out there offering anything better than maybe the others at this point?
No, in my opinion, they don't vote for anything. I don't know. I would dare anybody to go to a website of a senior U.S. senator or governor and find out what they really thought. In fact, I will tell you this. By the way, the Heritage Foundation is run by former Senator Jim DeMint. And by the way, I say this in due deference of really nice people. I'm not even dealing with Nancy Pelosi. They're not dealing with the nuts, right? So when Jim DeMint was a U.S. Senator, I used to go to his website. Where was his balanced budget? Didn't have it. I think I'm the only person who's willing to say, this is what we got to do. Now, maybe I can't get elected to it. But you people, and your children, and your friends, we have to start a movement that, yes, we're going to hold their feet to the fire. How will you balance the budget, Senator Joe? Congressman Jim, how will you balance the budget? Look at by the way, the most embarrassing thing when you talk about, this includes people who are maybe going to run for president. We shut down the government a year ago, right? Big taboo. Of course, do you know that GDP was revised upwards for that quarter after they shut the government down? No, you don't know that. But it was, right? Do you know that all 407 U.S. congressmen, every one of them, took a vote on a Friday to pay back all the federal workers, all their back pay, use up none of their vacation time, not adjust 1 cent for their pension. 407 to 0. How could it be? Something reasonable would have been, listen, you had 4 weeks off, give up 2 weeks vacation, and we know we're going to pay you for a week. Whatever. But people who work for the federal government, except for the military and so forth, in very critical situations, if you don't show up for work tomorrow, do you get paid? No! So what kind of world are we living with? 407. That means all the Republicans, there were a couple Democrats all thought this was a good idea. And that shows you how little they really give a rat's you-know-what about what you think. And we've got to change that. Now, like now, we don't have, I mean, if we had to, listen, Reagan ran up a deficit, right? 1.9 trillion while he was president. At least we defeated the Soviet Union. What do we have to say about George? I was with George Bush a year ago. Nice guy. Had dinner with 50 people in a room, a little different than this room, but it was a nice room. And he sat, literally, head to head back. He got up and spoke. He said at one point that he hadn't raised the deficit. I mean, I wasn't going to get up. I mean, listen, the President of the United States, you know, I'm not going to get up and start screaming, what are you talking about? We're at 5.9 trillion while you were the president. And now you open the door to what would be 7.4 trillion over, at least, over Barack Obama, who keeps talking about he's cut it in half. You picked the worst year, like 1.2 trillion, and cut it down to 600 billion. They literally walk around and I don't know, reporters report it. The deficit's been cut in half. What? Huh? As if now 600 billion is like, oh, wow, it's, you know, it's a nice number. It's a disaster. And it really, I mean, listen, if I didn't have any children, maybe I wouldn't be called. I got 6 kids. Their future's bleak. When this hits the fan, and can I give you one last thing? In the budget, in the finance, we borrow now at 2.2%. 17, it's really not, I say $17.7 trillion. It's called 18 trillion. It's really not. Some it's borrowed, we don't pay interest on all of that, but some of it goes back and forth. It's like 14 trillion. So we borrow at 2% because the lousy Federal Reserve, because of their wealth effect to keep stock of prices up as best they can never get out of what they've done. They don't know how to get out of it, they don't know how to unwind it. I don't know how to unwind it, and nobody serious in this country knows how to unwind $4.3 trillion that they've taken on the balance sheet. Nobody knows. But the scariest thing is this, and you remember I said this, because no one talks about it. If you went up and asked the average American walking down the street, and they knew that we had 30-year bonds and 3-month bills, and you said, what's the average duration of our debt? How long is the average, does it last? We have 30 years, 3-month, 1-month, 10-year bonds. People would say 15 years. Makes sense. Issue some 30-year bonds and 3-month bonds, it adds up what we call duration. The answer is not 15 years. We have to roll over all this debt every 4.2 years. It's what we in business call the rollover risk. Can you roll it over? And think about this. If indeed we get to 20 trillion, just to make up the number, we will in the next couple of years. And we borrow at the historical average. By the way, people know the historical. For the last 30 years, the average borrowing cost of the United States government over all durations of bonds has been 6%. So pick 5. Just pick 5, because it's easy math, right? $1 trillion in interest costs versus $220 billion today. And I'll ask this one question 4 years from now. Where's the $780 billion coming from? Are you going to take it out of Social Security? Medicare? Medicaid? Where's it coming from? Unless you think it's never coming. And Enron's never going down. I mean, unless you think it's really not coming, but it always comes. The average always comes. Now, here's the worst part of the story. Look back 4 years ago into Ireland, and especially Portugal, where their 10-year bonds yield like 3%. Then people, all of a sudden, bond people looked over and said, what? Huh? It wasn't like 3, and then 4, and then 4 1/4, and then 4 years later, 5. It was like 12. What if it happens to us? What if the people look and finally say, wait a second? And they will one day. They can't pay this back. What if it doesn't go to 5, it goes to 10? You either have to print. We have a different system than Germany. You have to have massive inflation to value everything. And we know what that does to the system. People lived through 1974 with odd and even number gas lines and all the stupidity for about 5 years, right? Until Paul Volcker came in at the Fed. The one thing Jimmy Carter did right, he appointed Paul Volcker. What's going to happen? So, why are we allowing so few people to do so much damage? In business, it's always about, we always talk risk versus reward. What risk will we take to get this reward? What stock will we recommend to investors? What IPO will we undertake if we can sell it and make a 6% spread? What will we do? This is so much risk for so little reward. Here we are.
I think one of the main problems we have is we really don't know how to deal with the media. I saw a news report today that talked about the last Israeli offensive, and I'm thinking, that was basically an offensive that came off of about 260 rockets. But that is an illustration of where the media is, and I think when you look at what Ted Cruz did when he went to the floor of the Senate and really stood hard on making sure that Obamacare was clearly identified and people clearly had to decide which side they were going to be on, and he clearly brought it to the attention of American people. He got slaughtered. And I even hear people like Michael Medved and Hugh Hewitt talking about how foolish that was. What do you do to get this media thing to not just decapitate any good intentions that we have?
Yeah, this is the $64,000 question. One thing I have stopped doing is I don't know why people do this. I don't refer to other people as the mainstream media. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Rush is the mainstream media, right? Fox is the mainstream media. You can get your news from all different sources. And we've got to encourage people to do that. I mean, at some point, the internet will really favor, I think, this change, where the people at NBC and MSNBC and so forth will really lose power. What fills that vacuum? It's a tough question. I think, unlike what Mitt Romney made a comment about when he was running for president, 47% of the people or whatever, I think we have to turn it around. And we've got to go find these people and really put forth to people that whatever he's not doing as well, who maybe not see the light about freedom, and convince them, is this all you want to live for? Is this as high as you want to go? Because I think deep down in everybody, whether it's the people in Hong Kong tonight, or the people in this room, we all have this thing that we want to be better for the future. And we can count on that.
Right.
We can count on that one thing that people really do, whether they were cavemen or whatever they were, but throughout history, we want it to be better, and we all have this great sense that it won't be.
You talked about the flashpoint that created the problems that we had with the World War situation back in the day. Let's use that philosophy and turn it around. What would be the flashpoint to be able to stop this belief that spending by the government is generally pretty good? If you were saying to us, and of course the reason we come here is to get good ideas to activate. And as I've listened to what you're covering today, great information, but it's almost overwhelming when you think about, well, we can't do anything, it's too massive, and it's just ridiculous. And yet, in our August meeting, we talked about the power of prayer. But let's get secular for now, because we don't want to be into that realm, even though that's where it really is at.
Oh, I agree.
Let's talk about the real world. Give us the one spend, the one stupid move that, if it ever came to light, 80% of the people, I think it was the guy who was here talking for Pete Sessions said, find an 80% issue, where 80% of the people are going to support it. Win on that. And the momentum then all of a sudden is peeled off from all these other things that are untouchable, like Medicare.
Yeah.
What would you recommend that that person says, you know what, guys, we need to look at this. I understand government does a lot of good. You have to learn to be able to not gag, but in terms of budgeting, but this is one area that we really have got a problem. I mean, where do I, as a conservative, talk to a bunch of liberals that I know from the public education field, where they don't have an ability to say, you're just one of those right-wing nuts?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking to some of those, I have these conversations all the time, and it's very difficult. And one of the reasons it's so difficult is this rational versus hopeful, or whatever you call it, conversations, where, I mean, it would seem to be obvious that we don't spend more than we take in. That would just seem to be so obvious. And yet, I think we have to acknowledge that there are people that will not come around to this way of thinking. And those people are not the people we really deal with. But I'll tell you what, if you watch my movie, and I've traveled this country several times, thousands of miles, with kids in a car, without kids in a car, with movie people, and I will just tell you this one thing. I'm driving, third week, two stories of making this movie. I'm about 3 weeks into it. and we're on sides of roads with people at Christian bazaars selling old clothes and warm pies, and with black people and white people and rich people and poor people, and they're literally just between here and Washington, D.C. And this movie crew that I'm with, about 10 people, all, I would say, at least agnostic, left of center, and we're talking about the budget deficit, trade deficit, and oil, producing all of our energy. And they start looking around going, hey, when are we going to see people that disagree? I mean, this movie is not just me cherry picking some people who agreed with me. It's like, these are the people. And so it's out there. Even though that they get bad information all the time from news sources, they love this country and they know it's in deep trouble. And I think that those are the people. I mean, we're in conversations with far progressive left-wing people. They are actively destroying the country. There's not that many of them. I mean, a lot of numbers. Percentage-wise, that's not the people. You've still got people all over, including where I grew up in Rhode Island, who still vote Democrat and have no idea why. They just gonna go. People in this movie, I'm sure, voted Democrat, but darn it, do they want to balance the budget. And they want the truth. They're thirsting for the truth, and we're not giving it to them. So listen, I just tell you, microcosm again of America. I ran on a platform in 2002 of a bankrupt city, and I would stand on a chair. I would literally stand on a chair on a street corner in a debate, and I would look down and say, listen, nobody's going to like anything I'm going to do. I didn't come all the way back here to live in Detroit, though. Let me fix it. When it's done, you'll be fine, but you won't like anything I got to do. And I won. That's not much of a message, is it? And they didn't. By the way, they didn't. I'll tell you, this is how you can get through to people if you're totally direct with them. I'm running for re-election. I'm on Arnold Avenue. I'll never forget it. My campaign manager, who was my high school economics teacher, gave me the book Free to Choose. True story. Retires to run my campaign. He says, Mayor, come down the street. This lady wants to talk to you. I go run down the street. I put my head in the window. Hello. She looks up. She goes, I hate you. I go, I've heard that before, man. She goes, oh, I'm voting for you. It had to be done. I just didn't like it. I said, man, I just like to kiss babies. I got a bunch of kids, and I didn't like it either. She drove off. I won 65-35 in the most democratic state in the United States of America. So, giving people the unvarnished truth, you got to find a way to get through to everybody in America doing this, but people want to hear that right now, and they're still not getting it.
Questions from anybody?
Yes, sir.
You say we've got 435 members of Congress. They're duly elected to represent us. But they don't represent us, they represent their own power interests and their own financial interests. We've got 2 or 3 generations of kids and young adults that don't know their civic responsibility, how to vote, or to even vote. So, how do you see this improving over the next 50 years?
It may take the real crisis. In other words, where I come from, it took a real crisis for people to pay attention. We hadn't had a real crisis. I mean, you think 08 was a real crisis? People think that, well, I mean, a real crisis. We placated so many people. I mean, imagine if there really were food lines. And people got to see the food lines like they did in the Great Depression.
4 generations that have never seen it.
Never seen a crisis. And so we are not, it's sort of like, they suppress fires, but then all of a sudden you got these terrible fires because they shouldn't have the little fires, let the fires burn. We're sort of like that in America. It's like we're ticking down to the real deal, Heck, by the way, in 1870-72, there was a Great Depression, but back then, everybody just went broke and just went back to work and kept going. In history, it's not even really talked about. 1870, wipeout. All the banks went broke and so forth. By 1877, no one could remember. And what we're doing we're not allowing markets to clear. To think, by the way, and I'll finish up with this it's a very difficult problem. And listen, it breaks my heart. I was called, someone at Colorado Christian University called me. I'm a fellow over there. I don't know what that really means, but I go to these meetings. They're really nice people, and I love them. And John Anders does a great job. But I was called in they had a 500-person, 18-year-olds, O'Brien leadership, who was a Christian actor who left it down. It was the middle of a campaign. I said, no, I'm still going to go help these guys out because I love Colorado Christian University. They do the right thing. And so I went down there, and these kids, public school kids, who were the good public school kids, who had a leadership to get out and spend a week in a leadership event, the questions went like this. In a little panel, and first question was like, how come there are no women in politics? What? Like, we know women in politics? Third question was like, how did the Walmart heirs get to own 75% of the land of America? These are real questions. Well, when I'm like this, and I'm thinking to myself, when I was 18, if we had some, if Senator Pell had come in, and who did it one time with John Pastore, or the people I grew up with, and Governor Chafee one time, the questions would not be like, it would be like, how do I get elected? How do I make a lot of money in America? How do I, et cetera. These were bizarre questions. Well, if you've been married or whatever, you kind of have these moments. My wife is there, 5 of our children are in the audience, and we have to leave, and so we get out, and everybody's there, but you can't say anything because we go through this. But you have those moments when you like wait till they get in the car before you say anything, but you kind of look at your wife. And she looks at you like, is there a future for this country? That was that moment, like, oh my gosh, these are good. And by the way, they were good kids. They weren't throwing spitballs at me. They were nice kids. They were smart kids. They've been indoctrinated, which is why, at all costs, we have to end the federal involvement. I said, what makes a conservative? What works over a long period of time? Federal involvement in education has not worked. Let me tell you how I know too. I have 6 children. I got a kid at Columbia. I got 2 kids. One's 17 and one's 18. They're both juniors at Colorado State University because I homeschool. One skipped 3 years. She's going to graduate college at 19. So many more kids could do this. I have 3 at home. I got a 6-year-old kid who does 6th grade math. Because I teach them. I'm responsible. Where are the parents? We're responsible. They're our children. We've got to take care of them. It's not about babysitting kids so you can have another job. Not everybody can do that, but we've got to take responsibility, and that's why we need so much more than even what the budget deficits are. We've got a moral problem in this country. What we're doing with our children, how we're teaching them. And it's so obvious. So, if it were me, like I had, I always do keep things in my pocket, but one thing you keep in your pocket, just go get a graph with test scores and federal spending. Just say, can you just explain this? It's inexplainable for our children, because even liberals love their children.
Speaking
Yes.
as somebody that works in a school, parents don't come and they don't participate. In the state of Colorado, there's a state mandated committee for every school, your accountability committee. Maybe 1 or 2 parents come.
Yeah, and by the way,
And
think
so
about.
if you're not going to your local school
But they would come if
meetings,
they thought they could make a difference. See, what's happened is the same thing at the local level. First of all, you got parents who are not involved as much as they should be, but also you got a lot of people who say, I can't do anything. But yet, when I was a kid, and I'm not that old, I remember PTA meetings on my street at Rhodes School. My father didn't have any money. We didn't have any money growing up. He drove around when his kids got to school age, the city that had the best education in public schools, and found a house for sale on a street with a public school. 5 children. He couldn't afford to send them to private school. That's what he did. That's what people did. But I remember PTA meetings. Everybody was there. I went and square danced in 4th grade. My house caught on fire. I remember my house caught on fire while I was there. And the folks were ready to see my house burning down. But that's a whole other story. But but the place was crowded. My recollection is the place was crowded. Why? Because they thought they could make a difference. And we've taken away that from parents where they really think, I can't make a difference. And we need leaders to come together to make people think, because once you think you can make a difference, you can't. But now we've got a nation of people walking around saying, I'm talking about rich, poor, middle class, like, it reminds me again of transfer. What am I going to do? So we got to make sure people understand we can do this. And I really think, and I remember I said this one day, because we need 1 million people in Washington. Not to clap and say we did a good job, we need 1 million people in Washington over one issue that we pick. Maybe we do a poll on it. Pick an issue. I don't care. Secure the borders? I'm there. Get the federal government out of education? I'm there. But let's not leave. Let's pitch tents like they're doing in Hong Kong today and not leave until we get what we want, and then everybody in America who believes in freedom, which the majority of people believe in freedom, will say, that son of a gun, this son, they actually did that. Holy crap. Next time there'll be 5 million. And it'll be rolling in the right direction. But if it's one thing that we're missing is the belief it can be done. Yes, ma'am.
Well, do you think that it's the Washington, that if everybody started going off golf courses and sat on them?
When I was the mayor, I took the top finance course at the State University too, and had kids and so forth. I didn't play any golf. I was pretty busy. I mean, it just boggles the mind. I mean, President Bush had a reading contest of books with Karl Rove, and I used to be like, obviously much different person than, but like, how do they have time to read any books? I mean, I'm grabbing, like, if someone says, read this book in order to get back to them, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm gonna tell the guy I read the book. Just skip through it. That was a great book, Harry, you know? I mean, I was too busy. And so I don't know how, I just don't know where people's priorities are. How could you go to 41% of the briefings? I mean, if you went to 40% of the classes, you never get through college, right? So how does that not lead to such outrage that it's like, it's time to resign? And it really is for this president. No one's going to impeach him, but it's time to resign. Of course, we end up with Joe Biden. He should resign, and we just keep having people resign. We get to somebody saying, no. But that's not going to happen, right? Because what we've really rewarded now is complete narcissism. I mean, I still don't know what the Kardashians have done to be in the newspaper. I don't even think they're attractive. I don't know what's going on. Right? So what's really going on? What's this guy's accomplishment? On the same side, when people announce they're running for president as Republicans, really, Chris Christie, what's the accomplishment? Do you know the bond rating in New Jersey the governor's gone down twice? Do you know he steals money from different... By the way, anybody who's a governor 10 months into the year, because years are usually July 1st or June 30th, 10 months into the year, every single year, the governor in New Jersey says, we have this big deficit, and all things are on the table. Do you not read the press briefings? You know, when I ran, or effectively in divisions of a private company, I ran Cranston, Rhode Island. Every day we ran a surplus. How do you run a surplus at the end of the year? You run one in every single account. I had a situation where we had $36,000 a year on pens and pencils for the, that kind of line item for a big division.